The STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice and the Lemelson Foundation have partnered to bring you this series of critical conversations on the importance of invention education. My name is Jeremy Shore, and throughout this series, we will be joined by families, students, and experts in the field who will share their own experiences and lessons learned. You can find me on Twitter at Jeremy Shore, and today I'm excited to learn more about the ways that invention education can prepare young people for the global challenges of today and tomorrow, and I hope you are too. Today, I'm joined by Kristin Moon. Kristin is the program administrator for technology and engineering for the Portland Public Schools. You can find her on Twitter at @STEAM_KMoon. Kristin has been a math, science, and STEAM teacher for 20 years. Additionally, Kristin has worked with the Oregon Mesa Math, Engineering, Science Achievement as a school chapter advisor, invention education curriculum writer, and provided professional development for chapter advisors and mentors. In the past year, Kristin has collaborated with 4 invention educators to create the Invention Education Ambassadors, who are committed to supporting during the school day educators learning how to integrate invention into classroom instruction. Kristin is currently the Technology and Engineering Program Administrator for Portland Public Schools in Portland, Oregon, to work with schools, teachers, families, and community partners in her school district to integrate place-based invention and STEAM learning opportunities for students who are historically underrepresented in STEAM fields. Kristin, I always encourage the teachers that I work with, I kind of get the impression that maybe you do too, to test the boundaries just a little bit, to get in trouble just a little in their quest for experiences for their kids. I understand that even having students test some apps can push those boundaries. Can you tell me about that?
Absolutely. So one of the things when I was in the classroom is I was working at a school and I got the opportunity to be the teacher who had the classroom above the school office. So that was the front office with the principal, with the vice principal or school resource officer. My classroom was directly above them. And we were doing some kind of engineering invention. I don't even remember what it was, but the kids had found these apps on the iPads we were using to test force and then sound. And so they wanted to test out how sensitive these apps really were. So they started these ideas on how to do it. And at first it was like, smack your hands and see how loud that is. And then it was like, hit the table. And then they decided that like what they really needed to see is what would happen if everybody jumped up and down at the same time. So these 2 kids in particular had convinced a class of 32 to jump all at the same time and land, and then be real quiet and see if you could land and both sensors would go. So my kids are like jumping, boom, 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 right? I completely forget that I'm above the office. And all of a sudden, come running through the door is the school resource officer and bursts in, knock it off. What are you guys doing? Blah, 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 blah. And our class is like dead silent. And the kids all turn. He's like, what is going on here? And the kids are like, we're just jumping. We're testing this thing out. He's like, seriously? Okay, let's do it. So he joins us. We start, boom, boom. He convinces the group that we need to now stand on chairs and jump down. So, okay, we stand on chairs, we jump down. Next thing I do know that one of the assistant principals is running in. What? To the SRO, what do you need? What's going on? I can't believe this is happening in Moon's classroom. And again, everybody's quiet. The kids explain to him what's going on. We start going again. And now he's trying to convince that like we actually have to like push off, not just fall off the chairs, but now we got to jump into the air and down. And so we're doing that. The next thing I know, the principal comes running in going like, what is going on, you guys? It's blah, blah, blah. And the kids are dead silent. He decides to join us. But the best part is he is now trying to convince the kids that we need to jump off the tables. And the kids all look at him. They look at me. I'm like, I think maybe this might fall under the not safe choice.
What I love about the Kristin is, as I mentioned, I'm always encouraging people to push just a little bit, because those are the things that kids remember. But those are also the things that your principal and AP and school resource officer and those are the things they're going to talk about at their retirement too, because that's how you make learning sticky, is by doing something novel and different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like, it's those kinds of things of like embracing that, getting in good trouble or pushing those limits a little bit. But particularly for middle school students who are like my group of kids, I think are like the most awesome to work with. And for them, middle school is such that testing of that boundary. So being able to show what that looks like, to be safe, to be able to do those things and model that is a really important thing as they try and figure out what that looks like for them.
Yeah, first of all, I agree with you. Middle school are my favorite too, but also middle school teachers are a very different breed than all other teachers, I think.
We are. We always find each other. That's why we like each other, Jeremy. I can tell. We could see the middle school.
So Kristin, you've been teaching for about 20 years. Has Invention Education always been part of that? How did you kind of end up bringing Invention into your curriculum?
So it hasn't always been part of what I was doing. At least I didn't have the nomenclature of that. As I look back and I've worked on my own understanding of what Invention Education is, and as the field has come together, I think it's always been part of what I was doing. But the place I can point to is when I started working, the middle school I had been working at was closed for low enrollment, and I was moved to another school to teach. And I started helping out with the after school MESA program. And through there, we started looking at how do you make invention, how do we do the engineering challenges we are doing to be more about helping things be better in society rather than trying to make the next best iPhone, right? The next best car. Like, what are we doing to take our opportunity and power and privilege to help make things, different living experiences and those kinds of things. So we really started looking at Invention Education, and I was doing after school stuff. And my students historically were kids that people thought were not quite capable. We had low test scores. Our children, we were a Title I school, mostly working with Black, Brown, Native American people, kids and families. So there's a lot of narrative around what kids were capable of. And they started winning in these national competitions. And more than that, my principal started seeing what the kids could do. And he was like, how can we do this more? And I kept saying things like, imagine what I could do if I could have this as an elective. Right. And so one year he said, okay, here you go. And I was like, okay. And then it was those kinds of things of like, imagine what I could do if I was allowed to do this and I could be out of the classroom halftime and coach teachers. Right. And then I had a principal that went, here you go, and those kind of things. And then that story is kind of the story I kept saying as people were like, how do you do this? And I could say, imagine what I could do if I was at the district level doing this work. What would that look like for kids? And then people go, all right, here you go. So in that like good trouble, there's a lot of times of where I advocate for those things. And then people have a little bit like called my bluff. You know what I mean? They've been like, hey,
great, do
how
it.
about you do those things? And so that's been a lot of like, for me, imagining and being able to tell that story of what it could look like and bring people in.
Those are also the best leaders though, the ones that are willing to just say, you know what, let's take a shot. We're not going to break anyone by this. Let's take a shot and see what you can do. Those are when the best things come out of the best schools. That's always a component, a superintendent or a principal saying, yeah, let's give it a whirl. So when you started bringing Invention Education in, and I love what you said about, not the next iPhone, because that's both kind of easy to conceptualize, too easy, and in a lot of cases, too hard to actually manufacture. But sometimes when we're talking about just some sort of problem or inequity or issue in our local environment, we can make that bigger impact. As your students started digging into that style of learning, what sort of impacts did you see on the students? What were they saying to you? What were they feeling?
So like one of the stories I really like to tell about this is that I started doing, I was assigned a math intervention class and a reading intervention class. So for people who aren't aware of those things, those are often students who, based on some standardized assessments, are not at grade level, and they're considered needing a significant amount of support to be able to do the grade level math and reading and writing that they're being asked to. And instead of going and pulling out like a book and being like, hey, here's how we do this, let's practice those more, I brought in Invention as the way that we were engaging and learning those skills and applying them. And what happened is for the kids, one, they started seeing themselves as capable, right? Like that they could learn anything, that test score, that label that someone or something had put on them did not describe who they were as humans. But the other thing that was really interesting with kids is other kids who had typically seen these kids as not capable, right? Like in other classrooms, it was like, I didn't want to partner with so-and-so because they don't do their part, right? Other kids started seeing them as capable and smart and things that are going on. Families started seeing this opportunity. So I actually was having parents demand that their kids get into this class and have to say like, I'm sorry, your kids don't qualify. And they'd be like, what do you mean? My kid is a tag kid and they go to this. I'm like, right, but that's not who this class is for. This is for these kinds of things. And it really starts shifting the narrative about building on kids' strengths and opportunities rather than the deficit thinking of the way that we have historically described children.
Yeah, there's that one size fits all approach that we unfortunately fall into a lot in the schools, and when we break out of that, it's really amazing how much more our kids have to offer than what we see just under that lens. So I'm curious, Kristin. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's a global pandemic. I don't know if you heard, if it's on the news or anything near you. How has that impacted this type of learning? I don't know whether you guys are blended or virtual or hybrid or even in person, but separated desks and masks and all that stuff. So how are you having to shift to keep that invention education alive under those circumstances?
So in Portland, Oregon, we have open school in a comprehensive distance learning model. So we are all, teaching and working from home. And like a couple of things is like, one, the pandemic has really elevated some of the issues that we've always struggled with about who has access to what and the kinds of materials. So one of the things we've been really trying to figure out and leverage community partners around is how do we get materials into hands so that we can have kids doing hands-on things. A lot of people, particularly white people of privilege, really take for granted the ability to have something to stick stuff together, right? Tape, glue, that may not be a standard thing in home. So how do you ask those things? But what's been really great is it's brought the teachers together to really brainstorm what do those things look like and how do we help kids find things they want to try and solve, and how do we leverage those kinds of things for them to come together and solve those. Can we connect the kid who is in Southeast Portland to a kid who's working on North Portland on something similar and connect those pieces? How can we connect them to a community partner to help them understand those things? And how do we ask questions to understand what the problem is? So like as educators, when we're seeing kids not being engaged, what do we do in order to understand that? And then how do we bring them in as partners to figure those pieces out? What has been really great is in the places that are doing invention education, we are seeing they have better attendance and participation rates. And so what is really starting to be infused throughout our district is a really district move towards project-based and problem-based learning that is definitely a step towards more invention things and having kids see themselves and engage in their community about problems that are important to them rather than as adults, we decide what's important for them to solve.
I suspect, but I don't know, but I'm curious what you think. I suspect that a district that's heavily involved in invention education is probably a little better prepared and more agile in facing things like new teaching paradigms under a pandemic, because the teachers themselves are immersed in this mindset of, okay, nothing ever works out the way you want it to. So what's the issue? What's the solution? Did that work? How do we iterate? How do we continue? Do you see that? Do you think that the teachers who are working in that world are shifting easier than teachers who aren't?
I do see that pattern that teachers who have been engaged in invention education and embrace those innovative mindsets, that growth mindset, that here's what we are, the design process, here's where we are, here's what we're understanding, here's our best guess on how we're going to move forward. We're going to figure out if that's new and adjust. I do see that pattern that they are able to navigate those things and be more comfortable with the unknown. I think that's the largest thing, is like, it's that comfort. When you're teaching in that style in person, you can't know every little step that's going to come along. You can be pretty well planned, but you have to be agile and change based on what happens, or supplies, or all those kinds of things. So this isn't that much different. We're just further away than being from kids than being in person, where we would have those in-person relationships happening.
I'm curious, you mentioned a little bit ago that you kind of got into your role by saying this should be an elective, and it's starting, and so forth. If I'm a teacher and I'm interested in that, and I have a principal that says, all right, yeah, great, I agree with you, this can be an elective, this could be a class, this could be a district program, whatever it is, what should I be thinking about to get that off the ground? What lessons did you learn in those early days that would have done you better to know kind of ahead of time?
One of the things I would say is really important is, a lot of times when we start talking about invention, people get really stuck on the stuff and the things. And having access to the latest technology, the robotic kits, the computers, and all those kinds of things doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do invention. So there's so many things around those things, like not getting so stuck on those things, like recyclable materials. I worked in a school, like when I started off, my budget was $100 for the entire year.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So really thinking about how you can leverage those low cost things, how you can reuse stuff. And then the other important thing I wish I had done a better job is really asking more about what kids want to do, and getting more comfortable faster with me not having to be the expert in the room. I think there's still a narrative that people feel when they switch, particularly in secondary education and STEM, of like, I need to be the knower of all things, and that it's not possible, and that's okay. And I wish, that knowing that, I wish somebody had talked to me about those things, and I had those mindsets, because there were definitely moments and things I chose not to do that I wish I would have done based on those.
Yeah, Kristin, I would take that even a step further. I think that we talk a lot in education about we need our kids to learn how to fail, how to, pick themselves back up and start again, all that stuff. But then we never demonstrate it to them. We craft perfect lesson plans that don't have any errors. The best thing we can do is try and fail in front of our kids and show them what we do with that failure.
Right. And I would take that like another step further in the system, is that we have to create in the education space a system that allows those things to happen for teachers and for them to feel safe, right? Without the judgment and the labeling. There has to be some things of like, if we want kids to engage in those mindsets, teachers have to be given the opportunity in the safe space in the community and culture in order to engage in those themselves.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, Kristin, I have been asking the same question to everybody to close us out, and I want to ask it to you too. What's the power of invention education?
I think the power of invention education is really steeped in kids. And I think what it is that it is the opportunity for kids to see themselves as capable of solving the problems that matter to them and their community, and that they don't need to go outside of that in order to figure that out.
I love it. Kids can solve their own problems. They are and can be the answer to the problems that they face and the problems that their communities face. This has been a conversation about invention education, brought to you by the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice and the Lemelson Foundation. Thank you, Kristin, for joining me today. Throughout this series, we will be continuing to be joined by families, students, and experts in the field who will share their own experiences and lessons learned about the global challenges of today and tomorrow. My name is Jeremy Shore, and thank you for joining us today.